Tired of compliance talks that put you to sleep? We've got you covered. No slides, no fluff, just real-world insights from two compliance pros with over 50 years of experience. Stay ahead, stay informed, and stay entertained. This is compliance without the boring bits.
Marcus, hello again. It's been a while. We both have had summer in between since we last spoke here. I'm going to ask you about your summer shortly, but I'll tell you my summer has been really typical Scandinavian. I spent time at my own cottage. I spent time at my friend's cottage. I spent time at my family's cottage. That's what you do in Scandinavia. A lot of cottage sauna and swimming and so on, and has not really been any consideration to compliance or the audit trail. How about you? Have you had the same feeling during the summer?
Yeah, so you've now seen several cottages during your summer, which is excellent. I hope that you also fixed all of them and cleaned the garden in all of them.
That is always included, yes.
Perfect. So well done, you. I've spent my summer also at a cottage in Norway, dipping in and out of the fjord between thinking about the invoice compliance and audit trail and what to do next. So it was exciting, and looking forward to
Other
to
people see the fjords and they want to paint like a majestic painting of this, and you're like, how can I improve the audit trail?
No, exactly. I mean, always in the interest of our customers and always at the service of our customers, right?
So I think the audit trail, Marcus, is going to be a bit of a key today when we talk. And you published an article recently, which I found interesting on the topic, and what happens when trying to digitize the audit trail. And there was one thing in specific that you wrote. You wrote, "We don't fail at digitalization because the tech is weak, but because organization isn't ready for change."
Yeah,
And I
that's
wanted
true.
to start our conversation today by asking you, Marcus, this realization, which may seem obvious, was that like an aha moment with a specific organization, or was that something that has grown on time over time?
No, I think it's actually the result of the past 26 years that I've spent in this space. It's never really been about technology. Technology can do a lot of things. We both know this, right? So you can program things, you can create software that does certain things, but if the actual driver behind it, the human being, the human factor, isn't considered, then it's going to fail. Because if you look at invoicing and the process behind it, and I know you're going to maybe raise the sign in a second, but
Not yet.
it is really not that boring, to be honest. There are people that are processing invoices, right? Senders create invoices and they send them, and then receivers need to process them and pay them. And this entire, what we call invoice life cycle, is actually governed by the ways that these human beings behind it are processing the stuff, right? No machine, no technology can do it for you, not even the AI, which is gaining like momentum at this very moment. and
Mm.
and that and that kind of led me back to this idea to make sure people understand digitization is supported by technology, but the human beings behind it make it work and make it real. And if you're not willing to take the human beings involved on this journey, then you're going to fail.
And I think usually when we start our conversation, I like to bring like a recent customer example of things I've seen. But this isn't really a recent customer example because this is in almost every customer I talk to. They they think of compliance that from a technical perspective that we need to connect to an API and then our problems are solved. We just need to make sure that we are connected to the API for this process or that process.
Yep. No,
But the
you're right.
process is really nothing without the whole audit, and audit is nothing without the audit trail, and which then leads on to the compliance and so on and so forth, right?
That's absolutely fair. That's absolutely spot on. I mean, if you look at it at face value, then what we are looking at is this situation that has not changed, right? When a couple of years ago, the CFO said, "I really don't want to see all the paper anymore." we didn't actually see all the businesses jumping onto true electronic invoicing, which means processing structured data from a billing system through to the receiving ERP system for processing purposes. Someone actually tried to plug a machine in between to read the paper, which would have been sent to
Mhm.
a different country for scanning and OCR, and then they called that electronic invoicing and digitization. But it did never really deliver the benefits that true electronic invoicing would have delivered. And that's what you just said. This is exactly the problem that we are facing, and we are still facing it today, with one substantial difference, I believe, and that is everyone was shouting for the governments to get involved at one stage. And I had always warned, do you really want that? Because when governments get involved, it gets ultimately very, very difficult. So, but now the governments are involved, and now we see all these mandates that have all different flavors across the globe, right? There's not one thing that says this is exactly the same as it happened in the other country. And that makes it even more difficult now for those businesses that have, for the longer time, not really embraced this process readiness and the process re-engineering topic, and are now struggling to comply with all of these things. And
So
and
let's
this,
oh sorry, let's help our audience here, Marcus.
yeah,
So if my CFO is listening to the IT guys in the company, and the IT guy says, I just need to connect my ERP to this API, and then we're good for compliance in country X. And I, as an indirect tax manager or API manager or AR manager, whatever, I see, this is not enough, considering the audit trail and so on. How do I get that message across to the CFO to listen to me and not listen to the IT guy saying it's just an integration?
yeah. I think the most important thing is to discuss with him what he's trying to achieve. Is it just fiscal compliance, and that means, is he only interested in getting an invoice that is compliant with government requirements? Or does he really still look at the aspects of automating the invoice processing? Because then you have two layers. You have the fiscal compliance, and that is an invoice
Mhm.
that complies with the content requirements by the government. Or do you want to make sure that your AP staff is not actually overwhelmed with data or making sense of data that they have never seen before? Because then you really have to look into what data from the procurement cycle is going to have to be on the invoices as well, right?
Yeah.
Because that means you need to inform your suppliers what you expect from them on top of the fiscal compliance. And that delta, I think that is what is still neglected very much. That is a delta that is very much ignored because some projects are driven solely out of procurement. Some projects are driven solely out of finance. But in order to make these two things connect and to combine, right, you need to make sure that you have both things in one project, and you need to have that alignment in order to get the benefits out of it. Setting up yourself to success, that's the most important thing, really. And you won't set yourself up for success if you're looking at the invoice process and at the invoice life cycle in siloed and segmented approaches. That's not going to work.
And we talked about that last time as well, about how and this with the fiscal and the commercial compliance, how they differ, and how from a fiscal perspective, a company will be compliant, but you will have the automation rates all down the below. So I think it comes back then to cost savings, that you're able to prove that unless we consider also the commercial compliance, cost is going to rise in a country like Poland, where we see that the data structure doesn't have enough to support the commercial structure, right?
Absolutely. And then if you look at some of the things that we also wanted to talk about, like travel and expense receipts for processing purposes, where the customers really do not have this in scope at the moment and only find out when starting to roll out and starting to test the process. All of a sudden, there are documents that don't belong into the B2B circle, right?
Yeah, let's
And,
come back to that one, because I
and that
think
one,
on
yeah,
another thing here is, before you even have the documents in your AP lifecycle, a lot of times you need to be able to filter, right? To have some kind of firewall, or to be able to enrich the data or so on before it enters your AP processing. Um, are there cases where you have seen this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are looking at the situation where the governments are implementing processes, and by and large, for example, the one thing that I was just touching on, the travel and expense receipts submitted by employees through T&E solutions, by definition, by the government's decision, are also invoices, right? But from a business perspective, they need to be managed separately because in most cases they have already been paid either with a company credit card or by the employee himself. To actually make sure that the expense is reimbursable, certain things need to be considered, like proper addressing, and this is where things get really complex. And I think it nicely closes the loop on the discussion that we're having. You need to sit down now. You need to take a step back, and you really need to look at what are you processing inside your organization as a whole. Do not look at individual countries. Do not look at individual processes, but make sure that you have a good understanding. What documents are you processing today? I know that you find this boring. I
Because
find
you
it.
said it so many times, Marcus. That's why. Yeah.
The reason why I'm saying it so many times is because if you're like me and you're white in the meantime and you're not white yet, right? So that's the difference maybe. But I'm white in the meantime because I'm full of sorrow that we are missing opportunity over opportunity over opportunity to do things right. This is now the final stage where you need to do things right because we've already lost a lot of time, and now we are seeing these things escalating in the background. Because the truth is, again, and I'm saying that one again as well, and you can raise that boring sign again, governments do not care about process optimization inside the businesses. All they care about is their digitization part of the process, and they will force it onto the businesses. So instead of looking at fragmented parts of your invoice lifecycle and all the associated documents with it, because we've also spoken in past sessions about archiving, all of these things are still not looked at holistically, but they have to. And that's the most important takeaway.
So things happening recently, I think, were we all or were we all not expecting more changes in France? The French government came out saying that what was formerly called PDP is nowadays called a PA, and everybody's been speaking about PDP for years, or no, for the last year or two. You know, who certified PDP? What does a PDP do, and so on. And now we all need to forget this word and talk about a PA instead, right?
Yeah, it's a name change, right? The label changes. Well, it's governments trying to make the whole thing more understandable for the businesses, right? And I think that's all there is. It's just difficult if you then have to change your entire documentation because you were saying something like PDP and now you have to call it PA. But I think we just need to live with that. Politicians also have some sort of reputation to course correct where it's not necessarily very helpful to course correct, right?
But then again, a course correction is something that is I think should be applauded. You know, that you're not only firm in what you're doing.
I think
But that's
it's for
maybe besides the
understanding.
point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in terms of course corrections, there are countries that will need to do changes, right? With VIDA upcoming, we have countries like Italy and Romania where we have pre-clearance of invoices, and that will not be aligned with upcoming VIDA regulation happening in those countries, right? So we will see changes in those countries, or won't we? What is your prediction?
I don't know. I mean, for me, it's always difficult. Having been in this business for a very long time, I've obviously sat in Brussels meeting rooms the beginning of the 2000s when some joint approach to solving this problem was discussed. I mean, one of the outcomes of these discussions had been PEPO, which initially was like an EU-funded project
Yeah.
supposed to deliver a joint platform and approach, and look at the truth. The truth is it's really operational outside of the EU. Now it gains some more traction. But what I think is so difficult is if once you allow a country like Italy to derogate from the rules set, and by and
Hmm.
large, PIDA is a rule set, and I know you're a big fan, but the problem is if you've let a country go down a certain road, and literally millions of businesses adapt to these rules that the country has actually filed derogation for and has put into motion, how do you really expect the entire market to move back from that? That's so difficult. And we are already seeing the impact that it has on a customer if software has regression in it, right? All of a sudden, functionality is not there anymore. Now, expecting an entire market that has adapted to a certain way of dealing with invoices to move back from a certain state, I find it very difficult. And yet again, it's going to be massive change management. And as we've discussed on several levels, and I'm going to give myself the boring sign now, it's bloody hard.
But then again, would you agree with the statement that you can't make an omelet without cracking some eggs in terms
You
of going
can't make
forward with the
Yeah, and
invoicing?
there's no warmth without friction. Yes, there are so many funny words that we can use and proverbs that we can pull in here for justification. I personally think it's just testament to, again, readiness as well. Even governments should assess their own readiness. They shouldn't just follow suit and implement some things without actually thinking that they're ready for it. The German government is a very good example on the other hand, right? By 2018, I think it was, every single European government was supposed to be able to process invoices electronically, so inbound invoices, right? And every single government in the EU had to report that it was ready. The truth of
Mhm.
the matter is, if you still go into parts of the German government on municipality level or whatever, there's still tons of paper, right? So none of these things have really come through, and it's 2025. So you would argue, if then a government starts planning something like a clearance model, right? Real-time invoice tax collection, all that kind of stuff, without actually having solved some potentially easier problems first, how is it going to work? Really difficult to assess.
I don't know if we can put it into display here later on, but I saw this meme about how Germans really need their paper, how everything that they put on the screen, they need to print as well. And you're not German if you don't have everything stored in separate folders in the basement. And I remember even, I used to live in Austria. I remember my host family there as well. They had a room with just folders of paper that they had printed for archiving and so on. And I've heard stories about Germans coming to meetings with like printed emails to be able to show and so on. So let's see
Yeah,
if we can display here. Not my creation, but I thought it was funny when the meme.
and every email footer had this nice sentence: "Please think before you print." Right. So that was absolutely spot on. And it's not just German. I think it is probably a very German thing. But by and large, if you've been in this business for such a long time, and I know you've also had lots of customer interactions, you know how much people cling to things that they hold dear, right? And a piece of paper is something physical that you can take to bed, right? And you can cling to it. Having this all digitized requires a change in mindset as well. And and and
Yeah.
and I think that is what we will always come back to. And we can call ourselves boring until the end of time. The thing is that people do not pay enough attention to the human factor and to the need to communicate. So let's go away
Yes,
from
thank you, Marcus. The human factor and the need communicates. Absolutely agree because I remember at the hotel desk, they would not let me check in unless I provided a voucher on paper, and me showing it on the screen was not good enough.
now.
But me printing what was on the screen was good enough because then it was official, it was on paper, even though, it was just me printing it. I could have just made it up on the computer. But so, with you having been in Norway, Marcus, is this now why the Norwegian government is launching a consultation into e-invoicing 28 to 30,
I'm
2030?
I'm pretty sure that has nothing whatsoever to do with my presence in that country. But I think that Norway is, at least from their own assessment, probably on a logical next step after they have done the business to government part very successfully in their eyes for quite a long time now, to move to the next step. And I think for Norway, that's kind of a logical development, I would say. And then them
Yeah, we
asking
should say as well
should be done. Yeah.
there are forces as well trying to get the same thing to happen in Sweden, the neighboring country.
Yeah.
And with Norway, do you think is there any possibility it could be something other than people based in Norway?
Very difficult. I know that also from the example in Australia, for example, the idea behind both starting with business to government using Peppol first and then moving the market slowly towards Peppol is always in the back of their minds. I can hardly think that they would probably not use Peppol. But then again, I read about France just confirming that for business to government, Chorus Pro is going to remain the
Yeah.
platform, right? So you can also then say, okay, if businesses have reason to believe that
So
the Peppol approach is not going to work, then maybe they are going to say, let's try something else. And by and large, I think depending on the way that Peppol is set up, things like content validations to make sure that invoices are always complete, to also fulfill those business requirements we talked about at the very beginning of this whole thing. So the business compliance, procurement data being in the invoices. They might actually also ask the market whether they are believers of the Peppol environment or whether something else that might actually help more. I don't know.
maybe they'll come up with a new standard.
Who knows?
Yeah.
The world is my oyster, right? So we should always expect someone to come up with something completely new. I mean, that would be brilliant, right? Let's try something completely different and do electronic invoicing in a way that's never been there before. I'm just holding my breath to see how that looks like.
Hold your breath a little longer, and we'll move on to the next session because I want to discuss T&E with you. So you mentioned this already, Marcus, with travel expense invoices and how this is something a lot of customers have come to us to ask, how are we going to handle the T&E invoices, which they fear will be appearing with the AP invoices in Poland especially. But this is actually not just a Polish issue. It is something that is very much present in other countries as well, like Mexico and so on.
Totally,
So
yeah.
what is your advice on what should I, and try to make this concrete, Marcus, what should I as a business consider with my T&E invoices to have them in a correct flow? What is it I need to do?
I think you need to work backwards from the final result. That is a receipt ending up in your environment for reimbursement. What you need to do is you need to look at your travel and expense policy and see how it is being applied and adhered to by your employees. That's the very first thing that I would always recommend doing. Because what we're seeing today is that travel and expense solutions applicable in the market are not set up correctly, are being, forgive my French, bastardized to manage certain B2B transactions as well. And that's where these problems start. So I think the best way to go at it is to make sure that you understand how your travel and expense policy is enforced, whether it covers things like those clearance environments, how you're, for example, validating receipts handed in by employees who travel to Mexico, where the actual slip from the POS, the point of sale tool, carries the UUID that you could actually use to validate whether that receipt has been cleared with the Mexican SAT, for example. And then move backwards from there, make sure that your travel and expense policy reflects the reality on a global scale, reflects how you actually want, on which receipts you do expect. Because the biggest problem is if all of a sudden business to business invoices that have already been paid show up in environments like the Polish KSEF, for example, you need to have means to process those receipts separately. You still want to do VAT reclaim on those, which is why the supplier has probably addressed them correctly, but you need them to give you the idea and the means to separate those from business to business invoices that have not yet been paid, for example. It shouldn't be so difficult, but the truth of the matter is, if you look at the escalations today, customers are pretty, well, clueless about what to do with it. And that's also down to the fact that for a very long time, travel and expense solutions have ignored the rise of those clearance environments because they basically thought it's not for us to deal with it.
Yeah, has it
Um, yeah,
been an issue really? Because like you say, as it is today in Poland, I as a hotel just provide the invoice to the traveler or send it by PDF and so on. end up in the same flow as the AP invoices. I'm going to have a completely separate
Well, it does end up in
destination
that
for my
flow
invoice,
if
wouldn't
you
I?
tell your employee that they cannot get it reimbursed unless that hotel invoice is made out in the name and address of the company. Because then all of a sudden, from that hotel's billing system, the stuff ends up in the wrong environment, and that is then going to be a problem.
So we discussed the human factor in digitization and how we need to, again, and you and I said this many times, be holistic in our approach, right? Then towards the audit trail. We discussed the name change in France. We discussed data shortly and the changes that will need to come in many countries, and Sweden, Norway, and now a bit about T&E.
And
All good
Tony,
from my side, I think. You've
I
been
think
giving excellent insights here.
I think we're good. I think we've covered pretty much everything. I think we should also tell our audience to really go and read up on the things that we are publishing. As we've promised ourselves, we're not going to be provider specific in the way that we are giving out our experience to the market. And I think that's a final comment from my side. Please, and reach out to us if you have individual questions that you would like answers to, where we will do our very best to give you some piece of information you might have missed in the past.
And that's actually something I'd be very happy to do, get those questions from people also who are not customers, like how do we best work with X and Y? And that's something we do try to help with here.
We do. That's what we're
All
here
right.
for.
It is. Thanks for this, Marcus. Thank you for the chat today.
Thanks, Gustav. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to next time.
And that's a wrap. Thank you. Join us again next quarter for compliance without the boring bits.